At the end of Unit 3, Iona is again disappointed because, like the officer, these three young rowdy men too did not have time to listen to Iona's story of grief. So Iona is once again alone and surrounded by silence. In Unit 4, his grief, which had abated for a short while means that he had forgotten his grief when he was carrying passengers from one place to another. But when he is alone, this grief returns and rends his heart with greater force. It's a known fact that when a person is alone, the memories of sorrow or grief or distress hit him with full force. And it was the same with Iona because he was not able to express, or rather, no one was there to share his feelings. And so his heart was so full of grief that he was just waiting for one person to whom he could unburden his grief. So he looks around with a very anxious and a hurried look and searches among the crowd which is passing on either side of the street to find if there was just one person who would listen to him. But sadly, there was not a single person. Everybody was busy in their life. No one had anything to do with anyone. The crowds were hurrying by without noticing him or his trouble. And even if they did not care. Yet, this grief that Iona was carrying in his heart was so immense and illimitable. Illimitable means without any limit. And the author, Anton Chekhov, says that if his heart were to break, the grief that would pour out from it would flow over the whole earth, and yet no one would see it. So one can just imagine how much sorrow and grief he was carrying inside him at the death of his son, and not a single person to share. He was mourning and lamenting the death of his son, and all the grief was inward, internalized. And he had managed to conceal or hide this grief in that little shell or heart of it, and no one could see it, whether by day or by night, or rather, they didn't want to see. So while Iona is trying to search for one person, he, in the meanwhile, sees a porter. Porter is someone who carries the luggage from one luggage of people from one place to another, or from uh, the wagon to the destination or whatever. And he decides to talk to this porter and begins by asking him the time. But the porter, after telling him the time, just abruptly tells him what he was standing there for and asks him to move on. So the officer has no time, the three young rowdy men have no time, and even the porter who was there have have no time has no time for uh, Iona, and Iona doubles himself up and abandons himself to his grief. Means he's trying to, he is in a way totally immersed in that grief, thinking about the time that is of the memories of his son, recalling those memories and mourning all alone. And he ultimately sees that it was useless to turn to people for help. And when he comes to this conclusion, he straightens himself up, holds up his head, and gives a tug at the reins of the horse, as he can no longer bear to be in that place. And the horse, taking the signal from Iona, it starts to move towards the stables. Here ends Unit 4.